I'm Liam Sage, and this is Pelorus, in which we try to help you navigate the complex world around us all. Today is part 1 of a special 2-part show. How can we know where we're going if we don't know where we come from? We look back in time to see how the human race came to be the way it is today. Stay with us. Pelorus is supported by the Jackson Water Company. You need clean water in order to live a prosperous life, and the Jackson Water Company are just the people to be able to provide that clean water. With pickup points all over the country, they are perfectly placed to help you thrive. Use code word Pelorus when making your next water pickup to get 10% off. That's code word Pelorus, Pelorus, to get 10% off. Our thanks to the Jackson Water Company for supporting the show.
So the problem with that whole period of time, especially from an archaeological perspective, is how painfully digital it was. So it's very difficult for us, in this present moment, to say with any kind of certainty what the lives of average people back then were like.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a problem. So what do you and people in your field do to get around that?
Well, well, there's not really a lot that we can do. It means that our work is a lot less precise and more speculative than any of our peers looking at different time periods.
This is Professor Micheal Spears from New Brighton University. He specialises in early millennium history and archaeology.
How does that sound? I'm not too close, am I?
A little too close. If you could just move your chair back slightly.
Okay, sorry. Okay. You see, I'm not used to giving interviews, I'm afraid. It's
Professor Spears is one of the leading scholars on the early millennium period, the time from around the year 2000 to around 200 years ago.
Yes, and so that means that we are often not regarded with the same level of respect and therefore funding as we should be.
Critics say that this line of study is a lost cause, that we are never really going to learn more about this time than we already know. What do you say to those people?
I'd say they were wrong on all counts. Because we are making great progress each day. By collaborating with academics and scholars who are looking at time periods next to ours, we can extrapolate forwards and backwards to work out what life would have been like during the first centuries of the 2000s. So every breakthrough for the whole discipline of archaeology is also a breakthrough for us too. That is exciting, having the whole field working with and for us. You know, even if they don't like it, you think of all the resources at our disposal. We still have a long way to go, of course, but we're always making progress. Great progress.
Why do you think that this period of time is as important as it is? I'm sure most people would give up after a while, given how difficult it is to research and what have you.
Well, yes. I'm not like most other people, as you might have guessed. Far more tenacious than most people. I won't take no for an answer. But as to why it is as important as it is one of the most crucial points of time. It was a time of massive change and laid the foundations for where we are today. And the fact that we know so little about it means that we have an obligation to find out more. Not just for ourselves, but for those who we have forgotten too. The timeline is sketchy, of course. That is the nature of what we do. But the world started to go increasingly digital around the early 2000s. Whereas in the 1900s, we still have lots of surviving paper records of what happened. The advent of digital technology, while occurring in the late 1900s, really took off in the early 2000s. We can see, or rather see by their absence, that more and more aspects of society were going from analogue storing methods to digital methods.
This causes Professor Spears and others in his field massive problems. How can they study this period of time when so much of the digital world is gone?
We know that there was a massive bomb scare in the mid to late 1900s where all the global superpowers, the US, Russia, Cuba, etc., all had massive reserves of bombs. And there was nearly an all-out war. But they all realised that for the benefit of the world, that it was a good idea not to start a potentially planet-altering war. So, while they averted disaster this time, the world did not discard its hordes of bombs and bombing capabilities straight away. They held on to them for a while. All through the 2000s, more and more countries appeared to have acquired nuclear bombs. At some point, the global powers appear to all have mutually decided to discard their nuclear bombs. And this is a remarkable feat when you think about it, and a really great achievement that we really have to thank our ancestors for.
How do we know they discarded all the bombs? If this happened in the 2000s, like you say, there wouldn't have been much of a solid paper trail behind it, would there?
No, you are absolutely correct. There isn't much of a paper trail, and what there is, we have only found after the fact because we knew where to look. In what is now modern-day Muri, but back then was part of a larger country known as Australia, local explorers and archaeologists found massive warehouses underground filled with discarded bombs, each kept in separate sections by country. So as best we can tell, the world surrendered all their bombs and weapons of mass destruction, and they were put here for safekeeping, to make sure they wouldn't be used. And judging by the composition of the background radiation of the whole world, we can deduce that these sorts of weapons were not used during the 2000s, which, as I said, is a massive achievement.
While we must praise our ancestors for the act of putting down the weapons of mass destruction, of course that wasn't the end of wars on our planet, as we all know. So what do we know of the events that led to the massive reduction in the world's population?
We did uncover paper trails in the seats of power in the old world that showed the wars of the late 2000s were largely fought with EMPs. That's electromagnetic pulses rather than bombs or the like. Basically, everywhere on Earth seems to have been hit with these massive electromagnetic pulses.
How did the EMPs lead to the downfall that occurred?
Well, it might seem strange to us now, but at the time the world was really reliant on electricity and computers and the like. Basically every facet of society was controlled by computers. We're talking communications, food, money, transport, security, energy, education, water, basically everything that made the world go round and maintain the social order as they once knew it. It contained electronics and computers. And so, when the first EMPs went off, in what we believe was an act of war, it had a massive effect on that particular country. And so, of course, they did what any country would do, they retaliated.
But how did one country against another end up with the whole world being in turmoil?
And much like today, certain countries or regions were aligned with others. They were bound by old agreements that said, if you get attacked, I will come and support you. And so all it took was for one incident, one act of aggression from the right place to the right place, and the dominoes would begin to fall, and that would lead to a truly global war. And then things get really complicated when these agreements get twisted, and the country is bound to help both the attacker and the attacked. Yeah, what do they do then? It never ends well.
That still sounds like it couldn't have been enough to lead to the downfall of civilization. Were there other things that made the situation worse?
I don't think it can be underestimated how integral electronics and computers were to the world at this point in history. So when these EMPs hit strategic sites, power stations, water sources, big cities, etc., they had massive, massive impact. When no one can do any work, get any food, there's no power, there's no water, in a massive city, which is unnatural to begin with, it doesn't take very long for people to start losing their minds. Losing their inhibitions and doing whatever it takes to survive. But yes, you are right. There were some circumstances that made it worse than it might have otherwise have been. From what we can tell, not long after the initial strike took place, but long enough that most of society had deteriorated, the world experienced a powerful solar storm. This acted in much the same way the EMPs were acting, in that it destabilised the computers and the electronics, but rather than being a targeted attack to specific sites, the storm affected the entire world indiscriminately. This damaged a world that had only just stopped attacking each other, and basically put recovery in the short term out of their reach.
What awful, awful luck.
It's terrible luck.
How different the world might have been if that storm didn't happen. How do we know about this solar storm? There can't be a paper trail for it, can there?
No, you are quite right. What happened was not documented by a paper trail, or at least not one that we have found yet. But what we have found are cave paintings with stories accompanying them that appear to show the solar storm in full flow. After the wars occurred, these storms were spectacular to say the least, but they stunted our hopes for recovery for hundreds of years, if not longer. And given the widespread devastation we see, we think that these solar storms must have lasted years.
And now we go to a message from our sponsors. Our show is also brought to you today by Hove Security Systems, helping to protect you and your loved ones from the worst that life has to offer. So whether you need locks, landmines, bombs, barricades, guns or gates, you can get them all from Hove Security Systems. Use code word pelorus to get 10% off your first purchase worth 100 credits or more. That's code word pelorus, Pelorus, for 10% off your first purchase worth 100 credits or more. Our thanks to Hove for supporting the show. Hove, securing your future. That is unfortunately all we have time for this week. But be sure to tune in next week for the second part of our discussion with Professor Micheal Spears. I'm Liam Sage, and this was Pelorus. We'll see you next week. This episode was written and produced by me, Stephen Lemontree. The part of Professor Micheal Spears was performed by TheRyanSpark. Find him on YouTube at his YouTube channel TheRyanSpark or on Twitter at RealRyanSpark. Our outro music is Simplicity by Macrophore Music. If you ever want to contact us, you can do so on Instagram and Twitter at nevetslt or email nevetslt@gmail.com. Life is a roller coaster. You just gotta ride it. We'll see you next week.